So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay and to another replay that was given to me very kindly by Wind Swordsman 44 here, and this is going to be on another map that we haven't seen in a little while, for at least a year actually I think. This one is the Old Forest Road, and there is of course this settlement which is going to be the centre point of any siege battle which happens on this map. Most certainly is going to have its focal point around this settlement here, especially in a 3v5 such as this, because this is the place where the defenders are going to have to try and make their stand in order to mitigate the superior numbers of the attackers. I'll be interested to see if the attackers can close the gap to the one player that has to start outside the settlement, but I kind of doubt it. They're far enough away and in the very dense forest just outside of this corner of the map that I don't think they're going to be able to catch up. But over here there are still going to be plenty of options that this battle can take. There are bridges. These ones out here are going to be more a sort of obstacle for the attackers to maybe pass between if they want to link up with one another. This one is one of the routes into the settlement itself. The central lane will have this bridge as another thing to contend with. The other ones, however, do mean that you have to either go around the settlement over here, which is going to put you in harm's way of many of the archers the defenders will be fielding, or this one over here, which in terms of the approach is probably the one which is going to be most brutal for the attackers because of the need to go through here when you can be attacked from multiple angles by enemy skirmishers. There is also one right at the back, of course, but that does take a little while to get to, and much like the approach from the east of the map as we are going to be looking at it, this one that leads from the south is going to be open to archer fire all the way around really. But 3 defenders always need all the help they can get really against 5 attackers. I don't know who the attackers necessarily are, but the defenders are going to be a mix of those of Numenorian blood and High Elves, so let's see who is going to be contending with them. We shall start off with the largely middlemen dominated kingdom of Cardolan, played by Darth over here. Crossbows are actually going to be a very useful tool here, so Cardolan are actually a pretty decent pick. I mean, technically speaking, I think this would be playing on home turf for Cardolan. I believe this would be the sort of thing that would be in their lands. Minhiriath sharpshooters, though, are going to be pretty good at range, especially for dealing with those heavily armoured troops that are going to be from both Imladris and the 2 Numenorian-inspired factions here. And also their armour piercing in melee, which certainly doesn't hurt. Hearthguard of Amon-Sul are very capable in a skirmish fight, one of the better archers in the game for that sort of thing. Very solid, dependable spears when all is said and done as well. Minotaur Roman Gatekeepers, of course, just beefed up versions really of the Minhiriath sharpshooters, coming with a halberd in melee as well as an armour upgrade. They do have a unit of cavalry over here. Tharbad Riders have got a very good charge on them, which makes them one of the very few units of single HP cavalry which I think can actually serve a bit of a purpose in the current version of the patch, but that's more on maps where you're going to have the ability to get in and around the enemy and expose more open attacking lines. I don't really think that's going to be the case on this map. I mean, Darth is very welcome to prove me wrong, but it's going to be quite difficult to use them here, and the Tharbad Riders are also quite difficult to keep from routing as well as a result of the kind of unit that they are, as well as being from Cardolan. Wands of Tingorthad are going to be good. They're obviously a very capable unit of pikemen in their own right. And pikes in the late game of any siege, especially for the attackers, I find can be really, really difficult for the defenders to deal with if they dump too much of their ammunition downrange too quickly. Plenty of Greenway units here, which are going to pad out the numbers. Of course, there are a very numerous unit of spears. In melee, they're really very poor. They're not going to be able to deal a lot of damage, but they are actually pretty good at absorbing arrow fire, which is exactly the sort of thing you are going to need to take into account when you're the attackers in this situation. There's no getting around the fact you're going to take some damage. We've got some Minhiriath men-at-arms as well, which of course are going to be significantly better in melee combat than the unit just in front of them, but still nothing too special, just a sort of basic unit really. Tharbad Warhammers, armour piercing, going to be useful against all of the defenders today, and Cardolan have got a very strong unit in that regard here. We shall see how they do in their bracket fight, which at the moment I haven't filmed, but I do intend to pretty soon, and it may even come out before this video to be honest with you, so we shall see. And 2 units also of the Dunedain captains with the armour upgrade, maybe going a little bit too heavy for the elite infantry here and not enough numbers. 5v3, we'll see if his allies have decided to take a different approach, starting off over here with the Orcs of the Misty Mountains, who are presumably, fighting alongside the men of Cardolan, so not exactly a law-friendly battle, as I'm sure we shall continue to see. But we have Arthedain men. Orcs of the Misty Mountains, a very good faction to bring on the attack, because unlike most other factions, players are not going to be tempted to only bring elite units, and they kind of have to go numbers heavy, which is a blessing in disguise, I think, for most players. Mountaineer Coast, however, are a sort of more mid-tier unit here. We've got some heavy goblin spears and halberds around them, so plenty of armor piercing. Also got some heavy goblin infantry, which are not very good individually, but there are a lot of them. Goblin King's Bodyguard are also pretty basic as far as a sword and shield bodyguard unit go, but again, pretty numerous for this kind of unit, and also no slouches in melee either. Some hidden units which may very well be Mountain Berserkers. Got some Black Uruks of the mountains here, which heavy swordsmen, I mean, they are pretty good. They will of course lose to most equivalent units of the same tier from other factions, but they are very numerous and, again, fitting right into the Misty Mountains mould. Got some Goblin Archers and some Heavy Goblin Archers. They're very low tier, both of them, even the Heavy Goblin Archers. Oh no, the Heavy Goblin Crossbows, I should say, but yes. The Goblin Archers, very low tier, but you know, their purpose is really just to stand there and force some sort of reaction from the enemy. Otherwise, they can actually be fairly cost effective if you just allow them to shoot at your lines, so interesting to see what the defenders do there. And Heavy Goblin Crossbows, of course, useful for the same reasons that I outlined for the Cardolan ones, only they're not going to be quite as good when their ammunition runs out. Nowhere near as good when their ammunition runs out, in fact. Another Orcish faction in the shape of Angmar, we have Hartumihai? I don't know. Anyway, Angmar Halberds, again, we've seen a very similar unit in the Heavy Goblin Halberds to them. We've got some more units lurking in the trees over here. Angmar Marauders are very basic in much the same way as the Heavy Goblin Infantry are, but like I said, going for at least some more numerous units is, I think, a good idea. And Angmar, of course, doubtless will have brought some pretty nasty infantry in and amongst this as well. Some Trolls of Angmar, which are also here. Just the one unit of Trolls, interestingly enough, from Angmar this time around. And the general is going to be in this unit of Witchround Blackguard back here, which are a step up, really, from something like the Goblin King's Bodyguard we saw from their Orcish brethren from the Misty Mountains. And the rest of the units are presumably hidden in these trees, which may very well include stuff like Barrow Wights, Witches, all of the nasty stuff from Angmar, which makes them very, very difficult to deal with on the attack, and also all their robust infantry like Guardians of Cardolan and Witchround Pikemen make them particularly difficult to kill off quickly. Then we have their underlings in the shape of Safi, who is playing as Rhudaur. He's got some Dunman pikemen and some Cardolan pikemen over here, which, again, pikes always going to be useful for the attackers. Got to deploy them at the right time. The Cardolan pikemen can slightly mitigate the punishment that they can take from archers with their shield, but even still, you don't want to commit them too early, otherwise they will still be a target for a lot of archers because of how decent they can be in melee. Witchroam Enslaver is very similar to the Tharbad Warhammers we saw from Cardolan earlier, so presumably Cardolan has been conquered in this situation, and the Orcs and the already conquered kingdom of Rhudaur are going to try and move on to the heart of Arnor, the rest of the Rhudaur forces. Rhudaur can hide under normal circumstances, so in this kind of tree cover, most of their army is indeed going to be hidden. And last but by no means least, another force that has already been conquered as well, it would seem, is Buzzard's army here from the Shire, I should say, the Hobbit folk. I'm struggling to get my words out there, but so it seems like most of Arnor has fallen. This is kind of the last holdout, and the elves are finally going to come to the aid of the beleaguered last hope of men. Even the hobbits now marching in tandem with the Witch King's fell host. The battling Brandybucks are here. We've got some Proudfoot protectors in and amongst the trees as well. Like I said, pikes combined with crossbows. I've already mentioned the benefits of both kinds of units, and they're here wrapped up all in one very neat package here for the hobbits. And that's all I think we're going to be seeing from them, actually. There are some Ents here as well, who ironically are not hidden in and amongst the trees. But there they are, the rest of the Hobbit army, of course, much like Rhudaur, even more so even than Rhudaur. Much of their army can hide, so we shall see what transpires from their army. Now, we have the combination of the last holdouts from Arnor, which are represented by Numenor and Arthedain, being aided here by the High Elves of Imladris, the sort of last roll of the dice, it would seem, for the free peoples in the west. Starting off with Proxima Centauri, who is playing as Numenor. Royal Legion of Armenelos and Pharazim Swordmasters, always mainstays, always two very, very good units in class. Indeed, the Pharazim Swordmasters are almost certainly the best in class of heavy swordsmen. Narran Iru Sentinels, a very fine unit of pikes as well, very similar to the Cardolan pikes. They have shields, but they are, again, a further tier up, really, in terms of all of their abilities, but most notably their defensive ones with their armour and just their general stats. Numenorian Cohort and Shield Guard are here. The armour piercing on the Shield Guard will be more useful against certain factions on the attack than others, not so much against the Hobbit folk or Rhudaur, but more so against the Orcish factions and Cardolan. The Numenorian Cohort, however, will be very useful against the more lightly armoured troops of the former two. Numenorian Steel Bows, very low ammo supply, but very dangerous payload that they carry. We shall see if it is used wisely here by the Numenor player. Seafarers of Nindamos here in force, which is not too surprising because they can fill the void of being a makeshift infantry unit once their very nasty javelins have been expended. And those damage spikes are very important to Numenor. As much as their infantry is very dominant, you need to use your ammunition very nicely. Naran Rhudaur Guard and Arthedain Shadowbows and Belgair Archers making up the Archer Corps, with the 2 on the flanks here being the sort of thing which is going to be engaged in skirmish fights with the enemy skirmishers. Arthedain Shadowbows, on the other hand, will have to wait for the opportune moment to use their body-piercing projectiles. Now moving on to the Elven player, who's being played by Ellipsis. We have God Helim, who are going to be here as well, specialty projectile unit of Imladris. Imladris may be the least archer-focused faction of all the elves, but they are still very accomplished in this area, and the God Helim are the best of the bunch, with their Silverthorn arrows going to make advancing through this arrow storm a little bit more difficult. Noratino warriors, of course, can chip in better in melee than the other baseline Imladris archers once they run out of ammunition, which is the reason why you bring them. And when you're on the defence like this, you will need your archers to chip in eventually. Even these archers of Rivendell, who aren't necessarily built for it, will have to see combat in melee eventually, as will the Eldaranway archers, but they're of course going to be far more useful in that regard. Gwaithir Rhudaur, perhaps an opportunity to redeem themselves from their rather poor showing in the brackets that the Lance Cavalry run, where they lost out to Dol Amros Arathirim. Of course, they're still a fantastic unit of all-around Lance Knights. It's just an unfortunate draw. And they should be pretty good in this situation, provided they can escape the fortress at the right time and hit the enemy where it hurts. If they get bottled up, the enemy have got enough anti-cavalry units, especially between stuff like pike and shot tactics with crossbows and pikes, that they could end up being a waste, so big emphasis on them. Gwaithir Arthedain and Gwaithir Mirdain, both units of high-tier elven infantry, the very defensive spears and the very, very damaging hammers. Over here we've got some more of the infantry sort of Rivendell, very basic, going for a more numbers focused approach actually in Imladris, which is interesting. They can do so, and their basic infantry of course will be better than a lot of the units that are being fielded against them irregardless of that, but it's very rare to see an Imladris player show any kind of restraint when it comes to tearing into all of their elite units in the roster builder. 3 units of Imladris Guardians without the armour upgrades once again, which is an interesting choice, but they're still a fantastic line infantry unit without that. Eldaranway Swordmasters, 2 units of Spearmen are more than enough to make a very effective front line indeed. And now we shall move on to the final player today, who is of course the player who sent me the battle replay once again, Winged Swordsman 44, who's playing as Arthedain. Got some Arthedain men-at-arms with the armour upgrades, dismounted Fornoster Rhine Knights, Numenor Gate Guards, Dunedain Trollslayers, so some very different units in here, the bread and butter of the men-at-arms. We've got the Fornoster Rhine Knights, who are going to be really good with that base damage. The Numenor Gate Guards are very, very similar to the Wardens of Tyr and Gorthad on the other side of the picket fence, so to speak, today. And we have some Dunedain Trollslayers as well, who are a really good unit of javelins, and then obviously multiple HP Axemen in melee as well. Very multifaceted, which will be useful in a battle like this. More men-at-arms, Rangers, which of course are always going to be useful, or a very important part of any defender's hopes in the current version of the game. So there they are. We have some Arthedain marksmen either side of this approach with some civilians. The Grey Company are in here as well, which of course are the mounted version of the Dunedain Rangers. Maybe a little bit more exposed, a little bit difficult to use in the right way. You can use them as standard Rangers as well, of course, but the main draw for them is their manoeuvrability, so we shall see if that plays a big part. Arthedain Pikemen. Pikes are always going to be a pretty big part of Arthedain's main line. Dunedain Peacekeepers, very good unit of axe and shield infantry. Over there we've got a Trebuchet, some Knights of Numenor out here as well. It's a fairly strong cavalry component actually, with both units of Lance Knights and Grey Company. Pretty big investment. The Trebuchet is here, so clearly not finished setting up yet the defenders, but they have time before the attackers arrive. Cardolan are fairly close, but they're not going to advance on their own without the support of at least the Misty Mountains on this side of the river before the settlement is put to siege. And finally some dismounted Knights for Numenor, another unit of Gate Guards with some Wardens of the North in there, as well as another unit of dismounted Fornoster Rhine Knights. So as you would expect, good archer corps here, good defensive units here and there as well. These 3 factions have got plenty of quality between them, especially Imladris and Numenor. We shall see if that is going to be enough for them to withstand the Witch King's war machine here, which has, based on the setup of the factions, like I said, already penetrated rather deep into the western section of Middle-earth. We shall see if he can be turned back in this battle, but before we do, I shall make a little bit of a cut while the attackers and the defenders get themselves ready for battle, and I will rejoin when said battle is beginning. So I do think now is probably the best time to rejoin, as we're starting to see a little bit of back and forth between the archers, and it won't be too much longer before the infantry assault gets underway either, I do not believe, with the Eldarenway archers and the Goblin archers down there actually trading blows. Obviously there's only going to be one winner in that exchange, but value-wise I suppose the winner would be the attackers, and I was initially quite worried for the attackers actually, because the way that the battle was shaping up, it was a very lopsided assault, with 3 of the armies seemingly forming up over here to this one choke point, leaving all 3 of the other angles to be attacked by only 2 armies, and that obviously would have been a very asymmetrical attack, and it would have favoured the defenders as well. But I'm pleased to see the attackers have been self-aware enough to not simply march into the slaughterhouse in that regard, and we will be seeing Angmar move over here to support the Cardolan Misty Mountains advance, and they will trust that their allies will be able to get the job done over on the other side. There's a little bit of a choppy frame rate going on over here, but crossing over the bridges here, Angmar of course a very useful faction to have over on this side of the assault as well. A little bit more room to deploy their numbers, and their brute force will also not go amiss. Really the choke points over on this side are a little bit more conducive to trying to use those mass pushing tactics, whereas on the other side the defenders will be able to respond to that a little bit more easily. Goblin archers starting to fire immediately. Belagire archers now also in position as well to start shooting down into the attacking forces as they form up. Nowhere near as damaging as the Eldarenway of course, but you don't want to be using up too much of your ammunition in this sort of situation, because the attackers merely forming up, only their most basic units so far have taken any form of damage. And they are of course the only ones to be starting to move in as well. Belagire archers in position, but not really anything too worth shooting. Greenway Garrison Spearmen, ironically enough, will be even worse than the heavy Goblin infantry, because they're going to be more resilient to especially basic arrow fire, such as what the Belagire archers travel with. Hopefully this choppy frame rate does clear up as the battle goes along. I mean, in this situation only sending forward your lowest tier of units I think is the right decision for the Misty Mountains and for Cardolan, and Proxima Centauri is spending far too long and trying to be far too greedy with a few extra volleys from these Belagire archers. I mean, there is a potential upshot to this, and that is that this force could be cleaned up pretty quickly by Numenor's defenders. Oh man, this is a disgusting frame rate. My PC finally is on the blink. I only need it to survive a couple more replays, and then hopefully by the time I do another big recording session I'll have my new one in attendance at my apartment. Well, Numenorian Shield Guard, Numenor Co. I mean, this is the kind of thing that I was talking about. A few Belagire archers will perish, but for the most part these very, very basic units will easily be dealt with by the heavy Numenorian infantry. Meanwhile, over on this side of the battlefield, Arthedain men-at-arms waiting, still the attack over here, yet to truly get underway of course with Rhudaur and the Hobbits. I mean, there has been a little bit of back and forth between the two groups of archers, dead Norritino warriors up here on the hillside, plenty of dead Rhudaur marksmen down here. Again, you could certainly make the argument that value-wise, despite more dead bodies being on the side of the attackers, they've had the better end of this engagement, but really the true pain will only start for the attackers over here when they start attacking up this hill in earnest, because then really the defenders can dictate the pace at which they die. There's of course that trebuchet to consider as well. Here Seafarers of Damos merely biding their time and waiting. Speaking of which, there is going to be a unit of Seafarers moving in. Further down, Numenorian cohort and Shield Guard still holding the line. Bit of javelin action coming forth from the attackers as well, with Adin men committing forward a unit of Snaga skirmishers. I mean, the Seafarers will be more effective as far as javelins go, but also more valuable for the defenders. Is it really worth committing javelins to a fight like this when your heavy infantry will be able to handle things fairly easily? No idea why the frame rate is so choppy. That's really, really annoying. My Garrison Spearmen going spear to spear with the Numenorian Shield Guard, and that is of course going to end in disaster for Cardolan. But having said that, by lurching forward, Numenor have left a very big hole in the middle of their defence, which if Darth wants to be a bit bold, he could commit some spears to start doing some damage over here. The problem is I don't think the attackers will actually be able to make this stick. I mean, this advanced force is all well and good, but their reinforcements are just a little bit too far away. Are we going to start to see an advance through the middle here as well? We are, just in time here. But again, it's only a single unit of Angmar Marauders. Fully upgraded Arthedain Man-at-Arms will be just fine to deal with them alone, but they will rout very quickly under the weight of the Gwaithir Rhudaur. So that ended about as well as you would expect for the attackers. This is the problem with having too small of an attacking force. I mean, having to interact with these bridges over here is annoying. Your units may very well force Pat to go around, which might be what happened to those Angmar Halberds. Actually, you've got to position your units just on the bridge and then make them cross, but that's the way things be in Medieval 2, unfortunately. It's just something the attackers are going to have to deal with. The bridge is working for the defenders, most certainly, in this situation. Greenway Garrison Spearmen are, to be fair, trying to take advantage of the gaps that Numenor are leaving them, but it is costing them, and they are going to need more in the way of reinforcements. Looking like a little bit of a counter-attack here from the defending cavalry, Knights of Numenor, intercepting the Tharbad Riders, and that's going to end in disaster for Cardolan as well. Like I said, in the composition phase, the Tharbad Riders are actually useful as a single HP cavalry unit because of their huge charge bonus, but they have a lot of all the same fragilities that regular single HP cavalry do, and they also combine that with low Cardolan morale. Crossbow bolts, however, also going to make the Knights of Numenor pay a little bit for that engagement, and a straight up trade between those two cavalry units would certainly not be worthwhile for the defenders, so they will need to retreat in the face of all these crossbows. More reinforcements sweeping across the hills now. The Goblin Infantry doing their thing. Numenorian Shield Guard having to turn around in the face of the Greenway Garrison Spearman's flanking move, but that's not going to be too much of a problem for them. I mean, like I said, Greenway Garrison Spearmen really don't have much in the way of melee punch. We'll see. Single unit of Numenorian cohort, yeah, obviously the goblins dying in droves, heavy goblin infantry and standard goblin infantry. Numenorian cohort is going to be so imperious against units like that. Javelins though coming in, so this is the sort of thing which may do a bit of damage, but the angle hasn't really been there for the Misty Mountain. You can see that there are some dead Numenorians, but really not all that many in comparison to the sheer amount of attacking dead so far. And the attackers are moving around. I mean, they do need to get into a position where they can attack the rear of the settlement as well. They need to pressurise all 4 choke points, really. If they're going to miss one out, it should be the one from the front, just because of how awkward the bridge can be to interact with. The Gwaithir Rhudaur continuing to do their thing. But on this occasion, the Angmar Halberds are going to be the ones to lead the way, although I would imagine we're going to see immediately, yeah, the Eldarin Way archers going to start shooting at them. I mean, could argue maybe it's not the best use of their ammunition, seeing as they're already depleted, but they're so vulnerable that killing them off is so easy. Every arrow that hits is very, very likely to be a kill. Angmar Marauders following them up, but again, this isn't the biggest of forces. Angmar moving around, I mean, it's very much a token effort here from her to Mihai. The Arthedain Man-at-Arms ready and waiting. Angmar Halberd's already shaken. I mean, this is kind of interesting, with the Gwaithir Rhudaur managing to get around the Halberds now. The Angmar Marauders are ripe for the picking, but I mean, it's not the easiest sort of terrain to get charges off with the Gwaithir Rhudaur, to be honest. And the Halberds now also turning around, so the defensive infantry line here really yet to be tested. The Angmar Marauders really broke on contact, and that has to do entirely really with the Gwaithir Rhudaur making things very, very difficult. More difficult than it already was for the Angmar, considering the bridge-based attack they were having to go in for. That was up to charge speed as well, not with the full unit, mind you, so the Angmar Marauders not taking tons of damage, but it's only a matter of time, you would imagine, before the Angmar Marauders do perish. We're down marksman in position. Safi arcing these shots overhead, and again, the Imladris archers, particularly the archers of Rivendell, are going to be a little bit more vulnerable to this sort of thing, and there's not really much that Ellipsis is going to be able to do about this, other than either engage these Rhudaur marksmen in a way he clearly doesn't want to, or try and hide his units. And so far so good, I would say, over here for Rhudaur and the Hobbits. They haven't really begun their attack properly yet, but they're preparing the ground as well as could be expected. Elder Gwythi Rhudaur getting on over here. And they're trying to position themselves on top of the hill to take away a bit of the momentum of the charge. I mean, that's the best they can hope for, really, but you can see that it's not really going to be enough to make too much of a difference, given the quality of the cavalry, given the highly basic nature of the infantry they're trying to do it with. Surely they're going to rout pretty quickly. Same amount of arms, they didn't counter-attack, so I guess the halberds are just straight up gone. Elder and Way archers back in position, more units are crossing the hill, but it's more units that are set up to be knocked down really by the Gwythi Rhudaur should they choose to handle matters in that way. That wasn't really a charge, just clumsily bumping into the marauders, but they're lucky that it's an infantry unit that isn't really going to be able to punish them as much as some other units would. More cavalry moving out. Grey Company firing away. And over here, and with the shields pointing in the right direction, it's not the worst thing, I suppose, for the heavy goblin spears. They will take a lot of damage to the Grey Company over time, but it's not as devastating an engagement as it could otherwise have been. A little bit more of a serious push going on now by the attackers over here, with Black Uruks of the Mountains and Minhiriath Men-at-Arms now joining the fray. Certainly more of a concern for the defenders than the units they've seen so far. Some Angmar over here as well, perhaps getting sick and tired of being bullied by the cavalry. They're instead going to try and help their allies gain some ground over here. And still this unit of Numenorian cohorts is holding the line, although now they're going up against Mountain Uruk host, things might be a little bit different, especially given the battle fatigue that they have already somewhat built up. And further back, the Belagair archers are in play. Forcing the Minhiriath sharpshooters back. I mean, Minhiriath sharpshooters among crossbows are fairly resilient, they've got fairly big shields, their armour values are okay as well, but you still don't want them to just be taking free damage essentially by defensive archers, and it is a worthwhile target to go after for those Belagair, just to try and maybe push Cardolan back a little bit. I mean, they are in a good position as well on this hill though for Cardolan, so they may simply try to weather that storm and attack the defending infantry. Turning fire into the archers maybe not the best idea for the attackers, but we'll see. Seafarers of Nindamos offering some support to the wavering Numenorian cohorts. Those javelins will do a decent job, and then I'm sure they will be committed to the melee fight as well. Best thing about the Seafarers of Nindamos, of course, is that dual nature of theirs. Angmar Marauders, though, they really haven't been the kind of unit that you would hang your hat on in this fight, but then they have been going up against Numenorian infantry and Imladris cavalry so far. And largely on an individual basis as well, so that's not ideal from their perspective. Meanwhile, a little bit more of an attack going on over here. I mean, the infantry finally did manage to get over here into a position where they could actually somewhat attack this front line. This Arthedain Man-at-Arms also taking a fair amount of damage, but the Numinous Gate Guards coming in to help shore things up, and the hammer and anvil strikes from the Gwythi Rhudaur is going to put an end to this little Angmar incursion really very quickly as they all flee. And that is going to be the end of that. Unceremoniously crushed. Sword of Rivendell waiting. Rhudaur marksmen arcing their shots overhead. Still going about their business in this way, Rhudaur, but it has borne fruit, as we can see, purely from the dead elves and dead men that are on the floor. But eventually they will need to start trying to pressurise the front lines a little bit. I mean, it's not an appealing prospect. Like I said, this choke point is probably the least appealing one there is, but with the archers already having their wings clipped a little bit, they may feel as though they can get away with more genuine assault. A few Angmar units over here still as well. Angmar Marauders once again leading the charge. Again, the Arthedain Men-at-Arms waiting for them, and in a one-to-one, certainly with the armour upgrade, especially the Arthedain Men-at-Arms should be fairly dominant in such a fight. Actually moving back a little bit from the swordsman now, though, to join the rest of the front line, perhaps. But like I said, they will need to start trying to pressurise this front line eventually, because their allies over on the other side haven't really had too much good fortune so far. Numenorians on the way forward. Looks like they are starting to break through a little bit now. More pressure being piled on, I should say. The Numenor frontline snow trolls are there. Still Grey Company waiting, biding their time with the other Arthedain cavalry units. The rear choke point maybe not going to be utilised. It seems certain for them in here, yeah. And they are pushing forward a long way, but if reinforcements are forthcoming, if they can maybe take this initial bit of ground, it can act as a staging area to push themselves deeper into the rest of the settlement. I mean, this is the problem though, snow trolls not quite up to the same level as the other heavy trolls that the game has to offer, and of course, as I've mentioned, Numenorian infantry, even the spears, because of their armour piercing, very effective against trolls, and so it has proven to be. The trolls melting away pretty quickly in the face of this defence, and the supporting halberds now casting a rather forlorn shadow. The rest of the units, Goblin archers waiting, Dunedain rangers are there. Plenty of depleted units now for Numenor, but looking like they could still be alright. I mean, especially with the seafarers to some extent splitting this unit of Minhiriath, which is causing difficulties. A crossbow volley, however, will probably be enough to finish off what remains of the seafarers. Elsewhere, victory seems certain for the Minhiriath men-at-arms. I find that somewhat hard to believe. That must be taking into account the battered unit of seafarers that some of their number are attacking in the background. This defensive line is going to hold up just fine, but more reinforcements could be on the way, and so far Numenor have been defending this area largely on their own. It may behoove some of the defenders to start shuffling their resources over here, because there's really very little need for this many to be over here. Once again, the Blythy Rhudaur being used really rather nicely. So far almost all the kills they've gotten are on very vulnerable, very basic units, but they do have a fair number of them. This unit of Rhudaur marksmen, the latest to suffer their wrath. If they're out of ammunition, they're really a rather... well, they're certainly not a very dangerous unit, are they? But even so, it's 3 kills that the Blythy Rhudaur are racking up, and you don't really want to be hemorrhaging your manpower completely for nothing. And it's not as if you're using up ammunition to achieve that. Meanwhile, I mean, one of the problems they do have is, of course, the rear choke point could perhaps be pressured by the units over here, if not for the trench, so the hobbits and Rhudaur are unable to do that job as a result of that, the map being what it is. So the defenders will be very grateful for that. Meanwhile, what's going on over here? Angmar now crossing the bridge with more of a serious force this time. The Blackwatch Legion are here, yet another unit, well, I should say that, it could be a returning unit of halberdiers, but also 2 units of upgraded Guardians of Cardolan. This will be perhaps the sort of thing which does cause a little bit of worry for the defenders. Wards of the North using up some of their armour-piercing arrows on the Guardians of Cardolan. Not the worst unit to use it on, I guess. Maybe not what I would pick. I always think that sort of your bodyguard tier units are the place to use your armour-piercing arrows on, but I suppose if you do want to help support your pipeline with what you have available, regular archers are of course not really going to be up to the task. Hit from the trebuchet as well, so really wanting to let Angmar know that they are still unwelcome over here. Eldrunway archers now out of ammunition by the looks of things, so damage is being done. Another fairly brutal hit, that. Rhudaur there. And here we have sharpshooters being pushed forward in melee, out of ammo, mace men in melee, meaning, you know, against armoured targets it should be okay, but again it's more a case of the full picture over here for the attackers has always been one where they're kind of just struggling to keep their front lines in the fight. Numenorian quality and damage dealing capabilities in melee proving to be a real issue. I don't know if these Dunedain Rangers have used their ammunition yet. I mean, we saw them loitering in the background, but I don't know if they have. I mean, losing your Rangers in such a fashion would be a real tragedy for Cardolan as well. And when you consider over here as well that the Grey Company shooting into the rear of that advanced force as well. Gaps have been available over here for the attackers, but so far not really proving to be critical, and the defenders actually able to exploit those gaps themselves on several occasions, and I don't know how much in the way of reinforcements they really have left. How much more of this can they actually endure, the attackers? So far, I mean, it's been almost entirely Numenor, and a little bit of support from Arthedain. Grey Company and Cavalry making life more awkward, but Numenor thus far will be very happy with their performance. The Angmar continuing to try and do their thing, but now not actually routing, actively retreating, but again the cavalry is back here again, the Rhudaur returning to make Angmar's life a living hell. Balance of forces evenly matched. Continuing to scurry away, the Angmar. Legion maybe trying to cross back across the bridge as well, but when you're actively retreating from a front line like this, it's never really the best of situations, and so far throughout this battle you have to say the defenders have looked very solid, and it's not looking so great for the attackers. Meanwhile, we are seeing more of an attack over here now. Arthedain pikemen and man-at-arms holding the front line. Fairly high number of attackers here, but this is the problem. This choke point, you see the Arthedain marksmen hitting the backs of most of these units, and almost all of the units from Rhudaur and the Shire are going to be vulnerable to all manner of skirmishers. There's some more troll hunters in the background. Proudfoots are here as well. Godhalim also firing in. I mean, this is a high value skirmisher, but perhaps at this point, at this juncture in the fight, surveying the situation across the battlefield, maybe the defenders feel like they can turn the screw in this way and just try and pull out such a lead with units like this that nothing can be done. Hessenmoor's troll hunters, however, in range of the Godhalim, and that's enough to kill off the front ranks of those units. So that's something. Like I said, I do feel as though, even though they have maybe been extremely cautious over here, I do think Rhudaur and the Shire have actually had the best of this among the various attackers so far. Certainly can't accuse a faction of over-caution though if they're committing the Ents, and both Arthedain pikemen and men-at-arms will match up very poorly against the Ents, so this might actually be the best course of action, especially when the attackers are in dire need of some momentum in this fight. Another unit of Godhunters back there. More units on the way forward. As I said though, considering the amount of frames still to go in this battle, a little over half the battle is still to go from that perspective. I don't know whether the attackers over here have necessarily got the ability to maintain the fight for that long. Meanwhile, heavy sword versus heavy sword. Black Uruks going up against the dismounted Fornosterine Knights. Of course, the situation being what it is, the defenders will fancy their chances in that particular exchange. Blackwatch Legion on the way. Damage being dealt, but again, Dunedain Peacekeepers, shields pointing in the right direction. Won't be too concerned about the damage the attacking skirmishers to throw at them from that perspective. Blackwatch Legion having double back are now over here. I mean, the front line over here is not really in a situation where mass pushing would really help. I mean, having more combatants on the front line is always going to be a good thing for the attackers, but the gaps are already there to be exploited, to be brutally honest. The Blackwatch Legion are not needed to make the holes, you just need more infantry on the front line. Like I said though, I think maybe that particular ship has sailed. I mean, Orc Fellas are on the way forward. Guardians of Cardolan having been the other units to abandon the front choke point. And now here, Heavy Goblin Halberds, I mean, that, again, like, been weird. The gaps have been there, but seemingly no progress made. Still got a unit of pikes and swordsmen to marshal this choke point, but really just a token force to make sure Angmar can't double back again and commit forward another unit. The trolls moving forward obviously going to be good at the same sort of things the Angmar are. With the elves on the front line, things will be a little bit different, but again, the Imladris Guardians are still ultimately a line infantry unit, so while they will do damage to these kind of units fairly quickly, it's not going to be the sort of thing to terrify the defenders, or the attackers I should say. More units on the way forward. Trollshot axe throwers maybe looking for an angle. Still, the defending skirmishers will be racking up a decent little kill count for themselves as Buzzard and Safi try to turn things around for the attackers as a whole. Certainly this is looking far more promising than what appears to be befalling the attackers in the other parts of the battle. Javelins and arrows being traded back and forth. Dunedain Peacekeepers being committed to try and help matters. Again, more damage, but not necessarily what they'd be looking for. The Trollshot axe thrower is managing to get a volley off into the God Helene before... what happened to him? He went flying. Gwythi Rhudaur continuing their odyssey in this battle of expanding that kill count of theirs. Coming in for another charge, trying to finish them off. I mean, if they hit a troll as well, they could end up skewering one of them. As long as cavalry doesn't remain in melee with trolls, as long as they keep it to just purely being off the charge, they should be fine. Front line looking a little bit thin on the ground. Banderbrass archers arm piercing in melee as well. The hobbits surprisingly vicious from that perspective, but they're still not really going to be up to the task of slaying Dunedain in melee in any great numbers. Further back, Asimor's Troll Hunters moving forward. I mean, certainly they still have more units to spare over here, the hobbits and Rhudaur. A lot of their units, of course, hidden in the trees a little bit further back. They need to make sure that they're ready to commit reinforcements as and when they are needed, though, because I think that has been one of the primary problems with this little assault over here. Reinforcements have been a little bit too far away. They've been caught in that awkward in-between sort of mindset where they haven't committed enough forward to truly take advantage of the gaps in the defence. They've committed too much forward to the point where all of the skirmishers that have been ready and waiting, right now it's the Arthedain shadow bows which will be a real worry for the attackers, but it has been just basic archers and javelins and the like, have been used very efficiently by the defenders purely because the amount of units that were committed to the front line were just right. Balance of forces evenly matched. Our Sentinels pushing in, again, Heavy Goblin Halberds trying to keep the front line alive, but they're kind of overextended. Their formation is already buckled, and obviously kind of unit that they are, they can be very efficient as a phalanx unit that's cheap, but as soon as their front line is buckled like this, they start dying very quickly, and then inevitably they'll panic and flee in the way that the goblins are wont to do. Minotaur Roman Gatekeepers trying to do their thing, trying to impact the fight in some way. Already a little bit depleted, you'd have to say, but even so, even a unit of 29 crossbows can rack up a good kill count for itself if it continues to go unnoticed. Maybe it was the steel bows that used up all their ammo on the gatekeepers. Still a few units of infantry, but Blackguard, spears, Nine captains. I mean, good units that still remain over here, but they've pretty much got one full-blooded attack over on this side of things left in them, I think. And with Imladris reinforcements approaching, some guardians and some swordmasters, I think the defenders will still fancy their chances, which puts more emphasis, ever more emphasis, over on this side over here. Imladris guardians trying to hold on against the hobbits. You have to say, Rhudaur and the hobbits do have the momentum over here. Whether they're going to be able to make up for the losses on the other side and also sustain this assault under the weight of their own losses that they're continuing to take, time will only tell. But javelins thudding into the front line. Some more troll hunters taking damage there. Dunedain Trollslayer is taking an awful lot of damage here at the hands of the troll hunters, and this is definitely a worthwhile unit to go after. Not the sort of thing that Arthedain will particularly enjoy losing in these high numbers, but Rhudaur certainly going after the right target. You can't accuse them of not doing that. Proudfoot, I don't know whether they've used up their ammunition yet. Maybe they have. Maybe they've been involved in the skirmishing. Trebuchet being utilised over here now. Not really the best of angles for them. And they also run the risk, potentially, of sliding off the cliff like Medieval 2 artillery can. Pretty decent hit there. Into the Eternials Troll Hunters and the advancing Trollshaw Axe Throwers. Helene just in behind. A lot of banked shots occurring, but most of them still connecting, so the worst thing. With the Elven reinforcements arriving to help shore things up, this defensive line still holds for the time being. Eventually, I think the attackers will push through here. Gate guards on the way across. I mean, at this point, only one unit needed to really marshal that line, and maybe not even that, because I don't think anyone can double back and actually attack that area effectively at this point. The Witchers, I mean, the Witchers are a great equaliser in this sort of situation. I know people aren't the biggest fan of them, but I do actually think on this occasion, particularly with a nice hit there right into the midst of all of those Numenor Sentinels and Dunedain Peacekeepers, causing them to rout in the end, I do feel as though this is the sort of thing which is kind of necessary actually for the attackers to start getting back into this game a little bit. And now, can they redouble their efforts?
The enemy are badly bloodied. They have lost half their
Shadow bows, Numenor Royal Guard. Is this where Proxima Centauri is finally punished for the gaps in his line? With the Witchers able to force those units back on the defensive a little bit? Heavy Goblin Spears able to maybe push forward. Still the Gwythi Rhudaur here, and still they are going to be able to add to their kill count with a nice rear charge here into the Mountaineer coast. A bit of a clumsy thing though, in the end, just bumping into the Misty Mountains infantry. Unfortunate for them. Elsewhere. Rhine Knights. Still ammunition being traded back and forth. More and more though, it's fairly apparent that the Hobbits and Rhudaur really are getting the better end of this skirmish fight over here. Gate guards did arrive on the front line to try and help shore things up, but the sheer weight of numbers is playing its part. I mean, still most of these units are fairly lightweight in nature. A mass push with bandits is not the sort of thing we see every day, especially not when it's Gwythi Myrdain and Gwythi Arthedain that are the units they're pushing into. This is of course going to continue to be a bit of a problem. That was a very nice hit from the Trebuchet, hitting only enemy units. Doesn't matter what they are really, even if they were all low tier trash, killing that many in one fell swoop is always going to be a welcome sight for any defender. God Helene. Forwards. attackers... Ugh. Are they going to be in a good position to use their crossbows? I mean, this is the sort of thing that's hard to keep track of, the second unit Proudfoots that we've seen. Again, they're having to bank their shots, which is never a particularly great thing for crossbowmen, but I mean, they don't really have too much of a choice in this sort of situation, I don't think. I think they have to try and just make the best of the situation and try and do as much damage as they can, as quickly as they can. Another unit of Troll Slayers, having already lost one really rather quickly, a large rout that, courtesy of the Trebuchet. Another cornerstone of this defence so far. Cardolan have doubled back actually and are prepping an assault on the dismounted Fornoster Rhine Knights. This is all well and good as long as this attack over here can keep going in some capacity. Still the Gwythi Rhudaur charging around like madman. Which around Blackguard moving forward. It does actually look as though armor-piercing arrows being utilised. Numenorian steel bows don't have the most ammunition, but with Pharazim Swordmasters and Royal Legion being committed forward, they will be able to ultimately claim victory over here. The Goblin King's Bodyguard and Witcher Blackguard, obviously the upper echelon of the Misty Mountains and Angmar forces, all also being committed to the fight. The Witchers being attacked. Maybe one more volley left in them. Yes, and a well-used volley as well, because they were able to kill off some of the Pharazim Swordmasters. With that third hit point, of course, they can be such a problem child in melee to deal with. Heavy Goblin Spears routing, but I mean, Numenor should still win over here, but it will be far more costly for them than it could otherwise have been. Again, it was somewhat of a weird and scattered defence by Proxima Centauri, which did work for him in some ways, but has also left him with maybe less units than he otherwise would have. Meanwhile, one unit of dismounted Fornoster Rhine Knights is not going to be enough to keep Cardolan at bay over here in the central choke point. Over here, Sentinels on the way across Numenor, helping out with this assault over here as well. I mean, certainly in terms of sheer numbers, this is still going to be the attack which causes the most worry for the defenders. Proudfoots are still there. What sort of reinforcements do they still have? Another wave is going to be necessary after all. Some returning Hobbitry in arms. Some farmers of Buckland. Maybe there's a few units still in the trees. I mean, we are approaching the point where the attackers are going to have committed absolutely everything. The defenders themselves taking more damage in these phases than they were early on. That presumably the Goblin General. What remains of the Misty Mountains surely not going to have too much left. Rodrum Javelins are a multiple HP shock infantry unit at the end of the day, so they are a concerning sight to see in these numbers. Rhudaur Rangers helping to surround them with the God Halim. In this situation, the God Halim are already somewhat depleted. That in itself, though, is a sign. And Rhudaur Rangers pushing through. A massive gap in the defence, and on this side of the battlefield, the attackers are starting to exploit it.
It's time to press the attack.
That I would almost certainly assume to be the Misty Mountains. Could be Angmar as well, I suppose. We'll have to wait and see. Snow Coast are running. Now, Angmar are still here with 21 Blackguard, but they will be following suit fairly soon, I would assume. Numenorian steel bows coming down, now out of ammunition. Will be very valuable as an infantry unit as well. I mean, 2 units of Dunedain captains this is. A duel between heavy swordsmen, but the tier of which the Dunedain captains will be easily able to outperform their foe. Trebuchet still has a bit of ammunition. What are they going to go after? They need to be very careful here about repositioning their Trebuchet because of the precarious position that Winged Swordsman has decided to put it in. I mean, they're still going after this force over here, which is what I would suggest. I mean, it's a bigger target, and it's also a front line that you are actively losing at this point in time, so even friendly fire is not really the worst thing that you can inflict upon yourself. Forwards, Imladris Guardians are here. pikemen. Well, Cardolan pikemen I suppose are one of the targets you want to go after, but that was a good hit. Many of the hobbits that are involved there being hit by the trebuchet. I mean, it may be time to retreat, honestly, for the defenders, but this transitional phase may be enough, actually, to give the attackers the leg up they needed. What do they have? Ones in the north. I mean, they still have a lot of elite units left, but only elites I don't think are going to be enough just through sheer numbers. For sheer numbers purposes. 9 Witch-Round Blackguard will ultimately be defeated by an overwhelming force of steel bows. Perhaps this is sort of a microcosm of what the defenders themselves can expect from the attackers as they fall upon them. And I mean, it's not as if the attackers are completely devoid of quality either, given what Cardolan still have left. Rhudaur presumably still have a unit of enslavers somewhere, and that will be very useful against most of the units that remain. Numenor retreating with what they have left. Anything that can be saved at this point, the attempt should at least be made. Trebuchet trying to do what damage it can. Still some units in here. Arthedain, which were left behind, but will continue to do their thing. I mean, rotting meat is being flung now. I mean, not really going to be terribly useful using up all the ammunition. The crew will have to play their part in melee later on, I fear. I guess at this point it is just a case of ×2 speed while the attackers circumvent this position, and there's only one choke point up to the final layer, so that is something the defenders do have in their favour. Still have a unit of completely healthy pikemen, plenty of high tier units in various states of disrepair that will be fighting to the bitter end. A few skirmishers that were present earlier on still alive, also being retreated. Hearthguard of Amon Sul still having a bit of ammunition. I mean, they're trying to bank their shots. I assume they're going after the gate guard, which is the right choice, but that's maybe not the finest angle. They could just park themselves over here on this little bit of raised terrain, I think, and get a completely clean shot. That would be, I think, the wise thing to do. We'll continue ×2 speed until the attackers are truly ready to begin their assault in earnest. Arthedain Rangers trying to shoot the gate guards. Yeah, this is a bit of a problem. The gate guards probably need to retreat a little bit so they've got some cover from the buildings, because you really don't want to be losing the cornerstone of what your defence is going to be here in the late game, based on where you've put them in such a way. Arthedain, Proudfoot Protectors also trying to join in from that perspective. I mean, they had some more Stroll Hunters routing really very quickly, being sent forward on their own in such a way. And kill off what they can. I mean, losing Arthedain marksmen like this is maybe not the worst thing in the world. Just trying to absorb that dangerous range of fire with something early on here before they can be a genuine problem. Arthedain Rangers retreating. Still a little bit of ammunition from these archers of Rhudaur proving to be something of a concern. 2 grey companies still roaming around. In addition to 3 Witch-Round Blackguards, there's still something of an Angmar presence on the field. They've actually been caught by pikes, which is unfortunate, so they die off almost immediately. I don't know if they still had ammo. If they didn't, then that's really an inconsequential loss at this point in the battle. Setting themselves up inside some of these buildings here. Ransacking the local tavern before deciding to try and take the administrative centre. Still the attackers taking their time here. Plenty of time for the archers of Rhudaur to do their thing. Axler is taking losses on the approach. I think finally we can go down to 1 speed. Witchram enslavers crush the Archers of Rhudaur underfoot really very quickly. They're going to need to set up a better defensive position than this, I think. A little bit chaotic. Back up to ×2 speed it is, I suppose, given that the two forces have not yet clashed in earnest. Plenty of hobbits still alive. And this is the problem though, if the Numenor Gate Guards are going to be the thing that they're basing their defence around, there are still attacking pikes. Not only the Franodine, but also Proudfoot Protectors are still alive. So through sheer number of pikes, I think the attackers will still have the edge. Certainly in terms of pure numbers, it's going to have to be the quality infantry that sees the defenders over the line, if indeed anything does. No warriors pushing down the hill, but this is a very poor idea. They cancelled their charge just in time for the Witchram enslavers to meet them in melee, and that was fairly grisly, you'd have to say. And yeah, Arthedain marksmen are not going to stand too much of a chance against the finest Rhudaur has to offer. That armour piercing cracking right through that breastplate they have equipped. Are the pikes going to move forward as well? I don't know, if you're going to choose this position to defend, then you're going to need to commit to it fully if you are the defenders, otherwise you will be punished for it severely. No warriors on the way forwards. Defeat is a distinct possibility. In completely unsurprising fashion for the Arthedain marksmen. I mean, they have moved forward now. I don't know though, I mean, it seems a bit unnecessary to commit for those 43 Norotino warriors. Every little helps here in the late games, especially by the margins by which battles like this are usually decided. If you're going to commit the Gate Guards, then you need to commit the rest of your army as well, I think. It's no good committing in drips and drabs at this point. It's going to need to be all or nothing. And I think Arthedain might be about to commit one of the cardinal sins here, of doing just that. The defenders are still winning by 4 percentage points or so. Constantly changing situation, but I don't know if they're going to be able to maintain those numbers. The whiz of Ranger Fire, there are only 7 of them remaining, but force multiplier of them being Rangers, especially when the enemy are bunched together like this, and yet they are committing one of the absolute cardinal sins of the game. Cowering with their elite units, saving them for later when they should be on the front line. Even if they go on to win this battle, it is absolutely the wrong thing to do. This is a little bit more like it. Committing the Knights of Numenor alongside them is definitely the right thing to do. So he saw the error of his ways fairly quickly there, and at least he's giving himself the best opportunity to go on to win this fight. I mean, perhaps he saw the fact there are Dunedain captains and enslavers in here and thought, actually, my units don't really stand too much of a chance. The hobbits deploying their pebbles in the typical fashion. Wardens of the North on the way forwards. Guard of Amon's Soul as well. Numenor need to stop being so cowardly as well and get in there. They may have done a lot of heavy lifting early on for the defenders, but the ride never ends until the attackers are completely banished as we head into the final 10k frames. I mean, this is certainly the final phase. I think the final phase got underway a little bit before this, if we're being brutally honest. There's a singular Warden of the North trying to kill off these 2 Franodine Rangers. They will surely be successful. The Wardens of the North well documented as being a very accomplished melee fighter as well as being very dangerous at range.
Our allies have fled the field like cowards.
This might be a bit much for them though, managing to kill off a single Dunedain captain, but having several of them, some of their counterparts from Cardolan already conquered. One of the defending armies gone, and that will be Imladris, so the Elven contingent of this defence falling. We'll go up to ×2 speed, given it is a very one-dimensional fight here in the final phase, as it very often is, in all fairness. Trebuchet crew getting involved as well, still proving to be useful in some capacity. Humanoid steel bows, Pharism Swordmasters being committed. That means the only thing uncommitted now is the Royal Legion of Armenelos, I believe. There's nothing left elsewhere. Everything being sent forward to the front line, which is as it should be in this situation. It actually gives you the best cover against enemy skirmishers, that, given that it's only really Longbottom mob that can affect the battle in other ways. And I mean, there are still high quality units, Dunedain Captains, Hearthguard of Amon Sul, but too many of them are either not of the same level as the defending units or defensive in nature, such as the Hearthguard. Such is the way of things. Longbottom mob launching those pebbles of theirs. And again, actually able to hit the Royal Legion, which is why they should be being committed, because they're getting damage done to them for free when they could be in melee, at the very least, doing their thing. Coming over to this side of the front line where it's thinnest is probably the way to go about things, and it will also give the Wardens in the North a bit of support against the remaining Dunedain Captains. Dunedain Captains lacking the armour piercing of their Tharbad Warhammer brethren as well, which would be the thing you would really want against the Royal Legion here. Defeat seems certain for the Hearthguard. Does he indeed? Pharism Swordmasters doing their thing. Only 20 of them remain, but the vast majority of those casualties, of course, were inflicted by the Witchers a little earlier on. Yeah, I think maybe the damage the attackers took on the front that Numenor was the lead defender, probably going to be a little bit too much to reconcile with themselves here, I fear. There's always going to be something they would have to come back from. I mean, it is dead even in terms of the kills at this point. There are still Tharbad Warhammers as well. The fact they weren't committed earlier is a little bit surprising, but maybe, I mean, as far as a unit goes, they're probably exactly what the situation calls for here. The Hearthguard can withstand a decent amount of punishment more. Royal Legion of Armenelos fleeing in the face of the Tharbad Warhammers and opening themselves up to some hits from the Longbottom mob, which is why actually I feel like it's actually not really worth retreating for the Royal Legion. Maybe to avoid the Tharbad Warhammer charge it is, but there's still 3 Witch-Round Blackguard. This is going to be very, very close. The margins by which we're working here are extremely fine. And again, considering how badly those initial Rhudaur General falling away, that is maybe a bit of a concern. The middle section of the battlefield, though, the transitional phase as well as the Rhudaur Hobbit skirmishing and then pushing, was well executed, you have to say. That has proven to be a pretty big deal so far. The Legion of Armenelos continuing to fight on the front line. Another attacking general falls though. I mean, this is a problem. Still ammunition from Proudfoot Protectors. There's a lot going into this final fight. I mean, the Illuminous Gate Guards long since perishing. Maybe that is something there's the Cardolan General, but that's maybe something the defenders could have done differently. Committing the pikes first and allowing them to take a lot of damage before anything was done was certainly a little bit concerning. The Legion, Pharism Swordmasters victory seems certain. There's not many of them left at this point though. Tharbad Warhammers maybe through sheer numbers. I don't know actually, I think this is turning around. The defenders finally falling a percentage point behind right here at the critical moment. The player admits defeat. That may actually be, no, it's not Winged Swordsman. So it's going to be one of the attackers. One of the Rhudaur well, not Rhudaur. Angmar, perhaps? Seeing as the Blackguard are... I mean, that's surprising, actually, considering one Blackguard is actually worth a fair amount in these kind of engagements. When the margins are so fine, but... by the same token, I actually don't think that it's going to matter too much. I think maybe the attackers are going to be okay. Kind of depends on the sheer strength of the Numenorian infantry, I guess. Maybe I put too much stock in the Tharbad Warhammers. Proudfoot Protectors as late game pikes, but are there enough of them? Longbottom Mob. I mean, they had to do this, really. They had to try and interrupt them with these dismounted Knights of Illuminus. So I can certainly see why this decision was reached. One Dunedain Ranger continues to do his thing. Tharbad Warhammers did do a number on the Royal Legion of Armenelos, but in conjunction with the Pharazim Swordmasters, they have ultimately been felled. Defeat is now a distinct possibility. There goes the Cardolan General. I think the Hobbit General already fell with the Longbottom Mob routing, so it is going to be a defending victory, but only just. I mean, that could have gone either way. The margins are such as well that... well, I mean... I guess now we'll see if late game pikes can really turn a battle around, but... the margins of this battle, regardless of which way it ultimately falls, are so fine that really any decision made by either side being made differently could have turned it the other way. Yeah, and I imagine this is going to end in a rout, you would think. There's still 3,000 frames left, so maybe the Proudfoot Protectors will actually consolidate. I mean, this is the thing. Like, where are the Royal Legion going? What are you doing? Oh, Longbottom Mob are returning. Returning from routing for them, like I said, this is Proudfoot Protectors do rout. I mean, margins are so fine. If the Proudfoots had not routed, the returning Longbottom Mob could have been enough to turn this fight around. Those clubs are armor piercing, even if the stats of the unit themselves are terrible. Very, very close indeed. Close in a very bizarre kind of way, in the sense that there are several things both sides could have done differently and arguably more effectively. Well, not so arguably for the attackers, but even for the defenders, maybe there are things that they could have done more cleanly. In the end, we are where we are. Pharazim Swordmasters, Longbottom, 64 of them against 12. And then 7 Royal Legion, but fighting uphill as well. Yes, a bizarre fight. And yet here we are. Here we stand. We seem certain for Numenor. And a long way to get here though. Ar-Pharazôn himself still stands tall. Numenor the only ones left alive. They were the ones that were involved in probably the weirdest of the front lines. Over on that side, perhaps a much more typical attack-defense front line was the one that Rhudaur and the Hobbits did, especially considering various strengths and weaknesses of their factions. See some T-posing Rangers stuck in the ground over there. There's really not much else left to say. 600 frames remain. Are the Longbottom Mob really going to win this? Surely not. Surely they're going to rout. Pharazim Swordmasters. I mean, the numbers were such that it was a little bit sticky. There's only one Royal Legionnaire left. Like I said, just a little bit. Surely it's going to be a rout here that ends this battle, because they're not going to kill off 8 Pharazim that quickly. Yeah, there they go. As I said, if those Proudfoots had just lasted melee just a little bit longer, that could have been the difference maker. I mean, in terms of numbers left, it's not the closest battle I've ever shown, but in terms of the margins by which that could have been decided in the late game, you could make the argument that that was. But yeah, the defenders victorious by the finest of margins, as mentioned. So yeah, I think a decent little battle this from Winged Swordsman. See what did the damage for his army. Warns of the North doing quite well for themselves, both at range and in melee. Dunedain Trollslayers, okay. I mean, one of them, considering the battering they took at the hands of the Troll Hunters, it's not too bad. The Dunedain Rangers, 417 given the current patch. Defenders, Rangers, this is the kind of number that you need to see. Trebuchet was used quite well also. Defending artillery can be something that you live and die by, and on this occasion they did just about enough to help contribute to their victory. Numenor Gate Guards, 2 units of them, important linchpins of the defence, pikemen, Arthedain men-at-arms, mostly the initial defensive points, peacekeepers, pretty much what you'd expect. I mean, the units that they needed to perform really, really well did. Some underperformers, but for the most part they did just fine. So yeah, big thank you to Winged Swordsman 44 for sending me this battle replay. Big thank you to all of the players as well for being a part of it. I think maybe Safi sent me the same one. I'll check that one, but he sent me a replay as well. If it is the same one, then obviously big thank you to him for sending it to me as well. Either way, all of the things that I mentioned are true. Fine margins. Rhudaur and the Hobbits did the best, I think, among the attackers. They managed to claim the most ground, but it was a weird battle, this one, in terms of some of the choices that were made by both sides. But in the end, I do think the defenders were worthy victors, because the attackers were really punished early on, and they were always trying to recover. They almost managed it, but yeah, I think defenders were worthy victors in the end. Winged Swordsman has actually sent me several battle replays, enough for me to be getting on with, certainly for the time being. So I will be recording several of them in a row, which is what I'll be doing at the moment, so I won't ramble for too long here on the closing screen of this particular battle. But the same things apply. There will be a live stream at some point, probably in June at this point, due to the fact that I can't really guarantee my availability throughout most of the rest of May. The same will apply as well to the brackets things. I'm trying to just record as much as I can to try and build up a bit of a backlog, so if I do get sent away for the full 3 weeks, there isn't too much of a gap. It is a bit of a scramble at this point in time though. So yeah, it is what it is, unfortunately. We'll see how things develop later on in the year. But yeah, other than that, big thank you to Winged Swordsman 44 and all the players that were part of this battle replay. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.